Welcome, everybody, to Blood and Bone. Blood and Bone is a podcast of the Transcendent Truth Media Network. If you'd like any more information about that, any blogs, any articles, any books, any merch, go to www.transcendenttruthmedia.com. You can find out all the things we're doing there. Today, I am joined with Andrew Christiansen. And how are you doing, Drew?
I'm doing great, Connor. Thanks for having me on again. And I apologize. There's no video to this because we had some connection issues, but um, if you're driving, you don't need video anyways. So
So true.
I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thanks for having me on again.
Oh, it's our pleasure. So today we were, just in DMs and private chat discussing a little bit about what was being said on the New Year's special for TTM and about, as you were just saying to me off the air in regard to the blending of the two kingdoms, which is really a good way of describing it. And meritocracy, also a good way of describing it, especially in not only like churches and clergy rostering, but in seminaries and training and book publishing and podcasting and all of that stuff. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, not only within Lutheranism, this is in all of Christianity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, where to begin, right? I remember when we initially talked. I watched the video, the New Year's special, and I remember we had a lively well, that's we had a good conversation after that episode that you put on. Was that with Roland?
Yes.
Okay. And you talked about kind of the just the type of hoops that one has to go through in order to get into that the whole ordination process involves, right? So like
Yeah.
from start to finish, which involves, credentials. And ordained ministry is always involved that. I mean, it's the clergy, to be a clergy person is always involved that. But when you mix that in with the just the whole phenomenon we've seen in higher ed for the past for decades now, just the growing costs of pursuing that type of education. And yeah, maybe it's time to rethink what some of that means. And I know churches have developed different alternatives and different models and everything, but what I enjoyed about the conversation y'all had, you and Roland, was that people, like as you said, I think in our DM after, people who feel called to serve God on the grounds of where they are or nearby, or um that that they feel called into this process of being ordained and set aside to lead people in the church, that um all these hoops they have to jump through end up, with the costs and with the things involved in it, can really be crushing on someone's spirit. Any human being that goes through these things, it can be crushing on their spirit. And but by the end, it's almost like, well, whatever. I mean, we can talk farther about that, but it's just like, oh, what is there any really good coming out of that? The current, setup we have. But
Yeah, a lot of it, I mean, and earlier, as you were just talking, you were saying it's always been a thing, which is, I'd say is mostly true, but it's not entirely true. I mean, we go back far enough and it's not a thing. Or, we look at other traditions and it's not a thing. Either it's not a thing now or it wasn't a thing before, especially like with Presbyterians and the log college method of education. That's not a credentialistic
right.
way of training. It's more of an apprenticeship, skill-based, understanding-based um, method of vetting and preparing and equipping, which
Mm-hmm.
to me is really what matters here. And like at Transcendent Truth Media, in everything that we do and everything that we are doing, public and privately, right? That is
Right.
things we publicly declare that we're doing and things that we don't necessarily advertise that we're doing. Whether that is in producing books or producing podcasts or producing articles, producing new pastors and training new pastors.
Hmm.
All of these things, as we seek to do them as a multimedia network and as simply a group of pastors moved and motivated by a concern for the actual, let's say the juice of the stuff, it's in everything we do. We are aiming for the thing itself. And
Hmm.
you look at so many different other groups doing these things, publishing books, um, training pastors, producing podcasts. So much of it has to do with ancillary nonsense. It all has to do, not all of it, but a lot of it has to do with aesthetics that don't actually relate to the content at hand, like they're not essential to the content at hand, and or are focused on financial income, right? And producing, or not producing, but making and forming these job markets and these careers, especially with the training of pastors. In which
Hmm.
case, like the majority of the money that goes into it, um, well, I mean, literally, it's all like the only reason we continue to have this is because it's an established career field.
Right.
Not because it's necessary. It's not necessary to train pastors that way, and really, it's not really even ideal to train pastors that way because they keep coming out, and I would say this, they keep coming out sucking.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and I have a whole critique about the current state of modern mainline Protestant seminaries, and
Hmm.
uh oh, I could go on about that just because the changes in the curriculum, the focus on so-called practical courses, like it basically turning seminaries into leadership institutes rather than
Oh yeah, and that's common too. That's super garbage
yeah,
stuff.
rather than focusing on Bible and theology and stuff. It's all about leadership because we need to be practical
Yeah,
now.
leadership and finger painting.
Yeah, and if leadership is finger painting. Yeah, but and I will love to talk about tons of that in a little while. But I remembered though, as we've been talking about credentialism. I remember this was again, I follow current events, but I can't even, there's so many current events and they change daily. But I feel like this was in the past year that there was the big debate and there's a big splash on social media of everyone giving in their 2 cents about the forgiveness of student loan debt. And rarely do I ever, and I'm trying to be mindful in my pastoral role and of how if I am to weigh in on that in a public forum like social media, I'm always careful about that. I try my best to be, but in the past year, I did give my 2 cents in that. And I remember making a Facebook post about this. This is back when, there's the big consideration of the forgiveness of student loan debt. And I basically said, whatever, do it, forgive it, you know, just forgive it. All these people in our generation, millennials are more than knee deep into debt. So just forgive it. But I made this post to make a point. I wrote this whole paragraph. I went on this screed, um, that was well received, by the way. I mean, I got a lot of like good comments from parishioners and stuff from the church I was serving at the time. I went on this whole thing about, forgive it, but why did we get in this place in the first place? Um, for the past 3 generations, there's been this expectation of that everyone has to pursue higher education. Everyone has to get a degree in order for them to be a person, right?
Hmm.
Everyone has to get a college degree. You're not human unless you go on and get a college degree, right?
Yeah.
And right. And I mean, I remember graduated high school in the early 2000s, and that was the messaging. That's been the messaging of the past several decades.
Hmm.
But of course, for the past several decades, tuition costs have rose exponentially year by year. And there's a lot of factors that go into that. Part of it is, as I've heard kind of from the righter end of the political spectrum, a lot of it is due to the bureaucracy of higher education institutions and making, with the Pell Grant and things that make high, because like theoretically, I do want higher ed to be open to more than just the elite, right? So I support things like the Pell Grant and like, every because there may be a genius who exists among the lower middle classes who, if they didn't have something like that, would not be able to pursue higher education. So I'm all about like providing this opportunity for people. But also with that, once you open that up, it becomes the expectation that everyone, now that we can do it, can pursue higher education, and everyone should pursue it, and everyone, and this, I think, has this was I don't think this was intentional, but it has led to the phenomenon of degree inflation, which is real, right?
Hmm.
And it's like, and so you have degree inflation. The bachelor's becomes the new high school diploma.
Yeah.
The master's becomes the new bachelor's degree, right?
Yep.
And so you see, this feeds the institutions which confer these degrees, and it feeds degree inflation, which in the long run is not good for anyone. Because what good is a society where everyone's walking around with a master's or a doctorate in something, but they don't have a job? It's like it's not, in the long run, it's not the best approach, and furthermore, I mean, people, there are like many ways to be educated and formed as a human being outside of like going to college. And
Well,
so,
and that's the main issue with
right.
credentialism is that it assumes that because you have a certain prefix or suffix that is a certain acronym for a certain program that
Mm-hmm.
you have taken, I guess, right? And you've graduated. But the thing is, like, you could graduate with a 50. That doesn't mean you, and for the other fact of the matter is you may have known it in order to pass. That doesn't mean you know it now, right?
Right.
And different schools have different things that they will teach you. Different schools have different standards of education. And
Right.
we like to pretend that an ATS accreditation means anything. I've been through several of those schools. It doesn't mean anything at all to you, really.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so for
And
me, it's like if we I have no problems with requiring our pastors to know a hell of a lot of theology. The problem is people coming out with MDivs do not know very much at all.
well, you're spot on with that. And you and I can both relate to this point. We both have been, well, I'm a doctorate student at Institute of Lutheran Theology. You went there. And
Yep.
remind me again, what was your course of study? What was your degree from there?
Well, I was in a kind of mixed two programs. I mixed the pastoral ministry certificate program with the MDiv.
Okay. So we both went through this school, which is still to this day that we record this, not accredited through ATS, which is considered the mainstream, accepted
Hmm.
theological accrediting body in North America. It is accredited. It has been accredited for several years now through ABHE, who has a
Hmm.
lot of, for the most part, a lot of like Bible colleges and stuff, but they do have. I think Dennis Bielfeld, the president of ILT, told me there's an Eastern Orthodox seminary credited to them, and there's like ILT and a couple other non
Hmm.
Bible, you know so but so they're accredited in that sense, and ILT, by the far listeners, I mean, they are in the process of being accredited by ATS, the
Yep.
mainstream body, which, and I think I was in favor of them pursuing that, and I think they'll get it. But yeah, you're right, Connor. They, simply by being an ATS accredited school or seminary, does not guarantee. I went through a mainline Protestant seminary, for my MDiv, for my, I went through that, and I, could there, you don't come out coming, you don't come out being the most there were so many things I learned. I'll just put it this way: there were so many things I learned from this, you know, unaccredited place called ILT that I did not learn in an accredited main. And I don't mean that to talk ill of the mainline Protestant, ATS accredited seminary I went through, seminaries, because my while I went to one seminary for my MDiv, I took a lot of courses through other seminaries in that
Hmm.
consortium in Chicago area. And so, yeah, it's there's no monopoly on knowledge information because of an ATS accreditation. So
Yeah, and like, but it's even more of a difference than just between an accredited seminary and an unaccredited seminary. But
mhm.
there's also a massive difference, or I should say actually a lack of difference, but a perceived difference. This is where the credentialism is coming in. It's not just people saying unaccredited seminaries can't teach you anything, but the fallacious belief, the erroneous belief that you to learn something, you have to give somebody tens of thousands of dollars at an institution, at a seminary, rather like, for example, what am I going to learn in a seminary course on theology proper that I cannot get at home through books, lectures, podcasts, and articles?
Connor, you're spot on. I can YouTube lectures from Miroslav Volf, or
Yep.
just like throwing a name out there. I like Miroslav Volf, by the way.
It's
For
a big name. Big
I
name.
mean, I'm not saying doctrinally there might be some things we differ, but you can find. I mean, access. We are in the age of the information
Hmm.
age. We are 25 plus years into the information age that has, I think, rapidly outgrown what higher education institutions can handle. And there's been a reckoning of sorts, I think, with higher ed, because they are like, reimagining what is our purpose, because the old gatekeepers are gone, right? I mean, you hear this in all types of social commentary. I mean, I've been listening. I listened to a podcast of Barry Weiss a couple of days ago.
Yep.
The person that was kicked out of Wall Street Journal, then she was kicked out of New York Times, and now she's on Substack. I mean, it's the same old story. The old gatekeepers of knowledge and whatever, they're not quite there, so anyone can go into a podcast, anyone can go on YouTube now. Yes, there's an aspect of that. It's like, okay, it's unfiltered, it's wild west, whereas your discernment in seeing what is true and worthwhile and what is misleading, misinformation, etc., that's something, I think there will always be the need for community for that, because I think uh community honest discussion, um and experience can filter that out.
Oh, of course. And
Eh,
and not just
right,
community and experience, but we also are going to include their vetting processes, right? So,
right,
like
right,
one of the things you're going to get from a seminary that you're not going to get on your own, and now keep that in mind, on your own, is not a mentor, but someone to overlook your work and to tell you where
right,
you're wrong. Right? Someone
right.
who's already been through the material, who's mastered the material, who's learned from other people, um, in a direct kind of way. Now, my question is, okay, so now that we have really been honest with ourselves and acknowledged that seminaries are not actually for learning, but are for doing and being vetted and being checked over, then we have to ask, is that worth that much money? And the second question is, if it is, then is that form of capitalism, that idea where everything has a worth attached to it, and everyone who desires to have it, especially for, because remember, I do not think secularly. I'm not thinking like a politician. I'm thinking as a pastor, right? So
Right.
when I'm talking about pastors, what I'm talking about is the church needs men. Of course, for me, this is men. For, I think you'd probably disagree with me on that, but for me, this is men who have
Mm.
been prepared by other men who hold this office to not only be trained in the theology of the ancient church, but in catechesis and symbolics and dogma, the dogmatics, and in the languages, and in theology, biblical theology, and in reading the scriptures and preaching the scriptures and teaching the scriptures. And then for someone to say that is a cost attached to it, and if you want me to form for Christ's church future pastors, me as a pastor, you have to pay me. I don't think that idea has any place in the church at all.
Yeah, and I like how you preface this, Connor, by saying you're not thinking like a politician here, you're thinking like a pastor.
Hmm.
Because for any listener tuning into this, we are not here about to go on a rant against capitalism. First off, I don't know how Connor feels about this, but I know you're in Canada and all.
Hmm.
I'm just giving you crap on it. But I think capitalism, for all its flaws, is a much better option than socialism or communism. But and I guess it gets into a two kingdoms idea. You know, the work of the church, the ministry of the church, uh, should not be ruined really by a system that tries to capitalize, I guess, to put
Yeah.
it bluntly and simply. I mean, I was trying to think in my head, how should I phrase this? I guess I'll just, be upfront with that. Yeah. I mean, like, um, and you see this all over the place. I mean, in, you see this in higher education, which is not a business, but it very much runs like a business. You see this in people who, I mean, even try to like sell book. I mean, like capitalism is a thing of the left hand kingdom, you could say.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
as is Marxism and socialism,
and
right? And
Marxism is these are all human systems,
they
and
are, yeah.
they're human systems of figuring out how to best have a society. And that's all well and good of going through that task, but
But you need to add there, this is how to have a society in the law, right? Because
and
both
have a society.
capitalism and Marxism operate on the basis, different interpretations of it and different applications of it, but
Right.
understandings of the law. So really, if we're talking about running Christ's church and furthering the mission of Christ's church by the law, or, having any kind of capitalism in it, running in it, any kind of Marxism or socialism in it or running in it, then we're talking about running the church, moving the church, sustaining the church by the law, which is absolutely haram. Like
Right.
this is disgusting to me, right? Because when especially with the pastoral office, if we are to start, and I know it's not that we have to start, we have to stop thinking this way. It's not that people haven't started. They've been doing this for centuries, operating as pastors in Christ's church on the basis of the law. If I do this, you pay me this. You pay me this, or else I'm not going to do this, right? Rather than the mode of the gospel, which says, I do this in spite of what you give to me, right? As free gift. And if we're not going to be proclaiming the gospel as free gift, we need to put our keys down and admit that we're not actually pastors, right? We're
Right.
employees.
Well, and I will say you're kind of putting me up to the challenge because I collect a salary and
Well, so do I.
and I would be very I'd be in a very tough spot if I knew that if I was doing this totally free, just because I'd have to reevaluate my entire lifestyle. But um on that note though, I think what you're saying with the capitalization, the socialization. I mean, all the different, the Holy Spirit. I'll tie this to what Jesus says. I mean, the Spirit blows in the wind that we
Hmm.
can't always foresee, predict, and the church, uh the church has many parts to play. One is to uplift, to put people to the office of pastoral ministry. And yeah, I mean, when that becomes when you come up with the system, like, all right, the way to do that is through accredited higher education institutions called seminaries, in which they go through and take all these different classes. Yeah, the church needs to kind of re-examine that. But I don't know, what do you think? I mean, what do you think are alternative? As much as I think the higher education, you know,
Mhm.
model is there's going to be a change in our lifetime. We're already seeing it. I
Mhm.
mean, there's really going to have to be a reevaluation of
Oh,
not
it's
just
already
in the
being reevaluated. But
right.
before we talk about the alternative, we're gonna have to end this episode and then start again. Um,
Oh, okay.
in a second part, just because I I ended up canceling my business whatever it's called on Zoom like last month or something, just because I ha wasn't having any guests on. But before we do that, it's just like, yeah, just to rehash this concept once more, and then we're gonna, switch episodes. But is it's not so
And by the
much
way,
that the
are we?
pastor.
I'm like really into it. I mean, do you want to record again in like a little bit or?
Hmm? Oh yeah, no, I'm like
Yeah,
literally for
okay.
the listener, we're switching episodes, not for you and I.
Yeah.
But
For our
just to
listeners, this is the end of an episode almost. So,
yeah, just to rehash that idea before I switch us over there is it's not that the pastor needs to give up his salary, it's that he needs to be willing to give up the salary, not to give it up,
yeah.
because he's not working for the salary, right? The
Right.
salary is given freely from the church to the pastor. The pastor is working freely for the church. And so
Mhm.
the economy of Christ's kingdom is free gift. It's not capitalism, it's not Marxism, it's gift, right? And that's why pastors have salaries, and that's why churches have pastors, right?
Mhm.
Because of free gift and the free offer of the gospel. All right, so we'll see you on the next episode as we discuss the alternatives and the solution, and what we can do instead of operating in the way of the law as the Church of Christ. So see you in a few seconds.